Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Conf42Cast, our tech podcast from a neighboring galaxy. My name is Miko Pawlikowski, and today I've got the pleasure to host Jon Edvald, the CEO and co-founder at Garden.io. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Very nice to see you. I hear you being in San Francisco this week. How is it?
It's I used to live here like 2013 to 15. City is not in its best state, but I always enjoy coming here. We have people here, we have investors here, and it's a good change of pace from Berlin.
Definitely. I mean, we're hearing from the news a lot about San Francisco, and it doesn't tend to be the good kind of news.
Yeah.
Is it really on the downside?
Yeah, I mean, certain areas of the city are definitely very affected. Like I used to live on Mission and 18th. I maybe wouldn't choose to live there right now, but it'll bounce back, I'm sure. And it's still good to come here. So many good people here, and let's sort of a little bit of a sort of industry electricity that's happening here. So I always like to come here.
Got it. Plus, the best winter during the summer, isn't it?
Indeed, Berlin is not known for its pleasant winters exactly, nor is Iceland, which is where I'm from. So I don't mind a season or two, but it's nice to just come to something that isn't too hot, not too cold.
Okay. All right. So we're not going to escape that question. Let's just get out of the way. What is Garden.io and why did you do it?
Well, maybe I'll start with the second part because so I've been programming since I was a kid, and seen like from Commodore 64 to where we are today, and when I started my last company, like we were running servers out of a back room. Cloud was sort of an early notion at the time. AWS did exist, but it wasn't mainstream. So basically, been following like this, from SSHing into servers and deploying manually and just doing a Git pull on one of the three machines you'd run your code on, which was nice and simple, but obviously very limited. And what's been happening, of course, is you have like from like mainframes to servers and racks to virtual machines in each of those servers, to containers in each of those VMs, and now like this prospective future of functions as a service, WebAssembly, etc. So what's been happening is basically the individual deployable is getting smaller and smaller. And it used to be that your code base, like perhaps in one Git repository, was your entire system, save for like a database that you deployed next to it. Now you have all these individual deliverables, and just keeping track of that. If you have 100 different services, like how are you going to reason about it? And we've been hitting this tipping point where more and more of a complexity of a system is actually in its configuration. Like, what needs to be built before it's deployed, and how is it deployed, where is it deployed? And you end up with this big graph of different things. Even for simple projects, you have perhaps a smallish graph, but still a graph of different things. And I had just moved to Berlin. I was working at a company there called Clue, and found myself spending an inordinate amount of time like futzing around with Kubernetes and those types of concerns and the testing pipelines and all that stuff instead of the product that we're actually building. So that sort of brought about perhaps you could describe it as a shoddy prototype of what Garden turned out to be, and sort of something home baked at that company. But what Garden basically is, it's a framework and a toolkit to allow you to build, deploy, and test more, just faster and more reliably, and in a realistic environment. So, and central to it is what we call the stack graph, which is dependency graph, basically, of these like 4 verbs: build, deploy, run, say for like data migrations, things like that, and test. So it is a bit unusual in this space. We're trying to do something a little bit different and perhaps blur the lines between dev tooling and your CI automation. So think of Garden as a way to describe your system and then run any sort of deployment, any sort of a test from your laptop, from CI, and make the whole thing faster. That's really what we're all about, is developer productivity. There's so many ways to engage that problem. We picked one, and yeah, so far so good.
Okay. So with every kind of project like this that I encounter, I always try to put it, place it somewhere neatly on my mental map. And as you describe it, it sounds like it should go next to tools like maybe Bazel or like Gradle. These things that, some of them probably built for monorepo that also addresses kind of some of the concerns that you were describing. Can you tell me how what you're building differs from, like the existing solutions? Let's say, Bazel, for example.
Well, we take design cues from these like build frameworks, like yeah, Bazel, for example. We actually had a customer once describe the garden and the stack graph. It's like Bazel, except you don't need a PhD for it. And the reason it's simpler to reason about it isn't as fine grained. We're not like getting into like which file compiles into what file, which is Bazel is often used when you're like building like very complex like C projects or C++ or something. So definitely some similarities, but meant to be far more accessible to a wider audience. So I think like if you have a small team, if you don't have a team managing like how you set up your build frameworks and something, then you probably shouldn't be using Bazel. But also like Garden has a lot more native concepts for dealing with cloud in particular. So there's Bazel is a little bit it's more generalized, but is definitely geared towards building in particular. We think a lot about the deployment and testing story as well. So definitely similarities, but basically most of our users and customers, they're going to be replacing tools like Docker Compose or Scaffold, as part of their pipelines. They're replacing a bunch of scripts that they may have to run pipelines. But we're not like exactly competing head to head with Bazel. But it's a decent analogy though.
Got it. I love it. Bazel minus the PhD. That makes actually a lot of sense. Hits close to home. So what does it currently integrate with? I imagine it's going to be a bunch of different plugins. Can you do like a quick, round of what plugs in out of the box?
Sure. I mean, our bread and butter is really like cloud native, i.e. Kubernetes and Docker. That this is like the most common stack out there today. So Kubernetes is the most used plugin by a stretch, and that's kind of where we focus our content and everything. But we also support Terraform and Pulumi. We have some smaller plugins like for testing things like Conf42Cast and Hadelint, and we have a range of like security integrations coming down the pike. So, but this is most applicable to you if you're using Kubernetes plus something else. And where it kicks in nicely is you have some things that you need to Terraform, or you need to use Pulumi to deploy, say, anything outside of the Kubernetes cluster, and then Kubernetes is sort of the main focus of the product. And this will evolve over time for sure, but we have it's plenty big a problem as it is. So we're trying not to spread our focus. But Garden is designed to be pluggable. So plugins are the name of the game in sort of towards the end of this year. Now we mostly have plugins that we have developed ourselves, but there's enough to do with just what we have already.
Got it. So like if I was to deploy like a simple application that I want to build into a container and then I want to deploy to Kubernetes, the last bit sounds pretty straightforward. But what does Gardener actually offer for the build? Does it leverage some existing engines for that, or did you build something your own?
I mean, it's all built on top of other things, but you actually have some options with respect to how you build your images. Like one is just good old Docker, just like a local Docker daemon that you have on your machine, and maybe that's fine for several. If it's not too big a project. Then you can also build in cluster. So you can use Calico or BuildKit, and Garden will take care of shipping the source code for every build, like incrementally as you work on your code into the cluster. That that has the benefit of using more of a shared cache between different people on your team. And the sort of the targeted ideal is that once any developer has built a layer, or a pipeline has built some layer, that this is accessible to everybody then subsequently wanting to build it. You have to. I'm sort of I hate to think of like how many CPU cycles go into building the same thing on various computers all the time, whether it's through Docker or something else. But that's one of the things that people use us for, is like to get more options. Not have to run Docker on your machine, even though Docker on like Docker Desktop, etc., like have improved quite substantially. It's just sometimes you like if you have 100 different services, there's only so much you can do with a laptop. So we have options on that front. Plus, you can write your own scripts if you need to, but then you kind of lose some of the niceties of like a pure integration.
Got it. That makes sense to me. I've got a very important question, actually. So the first thing that I thought when I saw your website was like, okay, so what's up with all those flowers and all this name? And I feel like there must be a good story behind it. What happened?
I mean,
like, this is definitely the most flowery tech website I can think of.
Maybe it's us just wanting to distinguish ourselves a little bit. I felt like there was plenty of like blue and gray out there in the space. But the analogy is, when you're working on a cloud system, like, it's not just something that you complete and then you ship and then it's done and then you can move on to the next thing. It's very much a living thing. And I guess the name comes from, we're sort of all tending our garden, like, and part of the appeal of using the product is that you can spin up your own dev environment and have that continuously running. And we're always iterating. We're always sort of, maintaining it, putting this thing in and removing that. I just felt like, to see myself as an engineer, as a gardener, I find quite appealing. And then, we just wanted the brand to be lively and inviting, because, I don't know, I can maybe step away from some of the cliches. We definitely did not want a cute mascot. I was kind of strict with that one. It's, I must like be asked like every month if like garden gnomes, we should have like a garden gnome mascot, and I patently refuse. I like to be different, and we'd like to be different.
Yeah, I like that. And frankly, when I talk about it, I usually compare myself to some kind of digital janitor. And I'm complaining, why can't it be tidy for 5 minutes? So tending to a garden actually sounds much better now that I think about it. All right, well done. Another thing that kind of caught my attention was that claim that you went and talked to some people and concluded they spend about 15 hours a week on, again, wasted time. For everybody who wants to find out, you can go to garden.io/resource-download and trade your email from the PDF. But can you give us a sneak peek? What did you do to like reach that conclusion, and how statistically significant it is?
Well, we did like a proper survey. We worked with a firm called Vance and Bourne. They did a survey with, I believe it was 400 people in the industry, and sort of people that are like either directly working on DevOps or adjacent to it, like managing that function or something to that effect, and some application developers as well. We actually found that one interesting thing was that the estimates for time spent on different parts of this sort of software delivery process, people had a very similar view on it. Like it wasn't like wildly divergent, so it definitely seems to track. And what we consider to be waste, because we're not expecting people to sit and punch in code all day. Like it's there's a lot of other parts of being a productive engineer, and certainly differs by role. But what the things, to list a few things that we consider waste, it's like working on like custom internal tooling to be able to deliver stuff, maintaining scripts and tools, maintaining CI pipelines. I would say just waiting for builds, waiting for CI pipelines. Like this is like definitely unproductive time. And even if say you have like a pipeline that takes 20 minutes, or it takes you have to file a Jira ticket to get an environment to test something, all these little things, they start to add up real fast. And this sort of underlines our thesis, is that there's a lot of improvements that you can make across the whole software delivery cycle. We kind of focus on the automation side, like whether it's a developer working from their laptop or what happens in CI, to reduce the time in waiting and maintaining this stuff. It can easily add up to an additional day, sometimes even two, of productivity any given week. So that's sort of, in my view, that's our market opportunity. It's not like we're going to be the only ones working on that, but whatever we can contribute, the multiplying effect of doing that for a lot of different companies, and certainly our customers, is pretty huge. So, we did the survey basically to see if, is our intuition correct? Like, are people actually like wasting as much time as we think? And turned out to be even worse than we thought. So, definitely work to do.
Yeah, so for anybody who hasn't seen it, there's a mandatory XKCD reference about compiling. Go and check it out.
Yeah, there's only so much office chair sword fighting and coffee you can drink in a day. Plus, it breaks your flow state. Like, even if it's like, an additional 30 seconds, like you kind of get snapped out of your working rhythm. And that also is very expensive. And that's kind of hard to account for in a survey. But I don't know, like there's, whether you have a bit of ADHD or not, I find that it's fairly common in our industry. Snapping out of flow state and juggling a lot of context and moving from one branch to another while you wait for something to finish. It's a sneaky but substantial drag on productivity, and this is what we want to change. Tighten those feedback loops.
Yeah, the context switch penalty is real, very real. Okay, so the next question I had written down here was about your experience of building an open source company. And, I'm personally a big fan of open source, and I've seen a lot of different companies trying to make it work, and, some of them doing very well. Although we should probably discuss the HashiCorp recent license change and all of that.
Yeah.
So
we definitely been thinking about that.
So I'd like to ask you, what's your experience been? What's your business model? What did you find? What were the lessons learned from, doing it differently, the open source way?
Well, I don't really think that we would have necessarily been able to do what we're doing without making it open source. Like in some ways, it's become table stakes. And also, like, if you're kind of breaking into the market, you're an unknown entity. It's partly to provide comfort to the user. Like, they're integrating this like pretty deeply into how they work, and for it not to be open source is a bit challenging. And that I think it's also just kind of try to meet people's expectations and where they are. But building an open core business is not easy. Building any business is not easy, to be fair. But there's always pros and cons. But I would say it was entirely necessary for us. Like, we're in the Kubernetes game, and there's an expectation that it's open source. We also want to be able to take contributions, and for people to be able to see the code and see because it's a complicated problem. There's a lot of edge cases, and for us to try and anticipate or address all of those edge cases ourselves is hard. The tack that we chose is the open core model. So what we sell is a product on top of the open core, as opposed to like an enterprise version of the same thing, like which would be a little bit more akin to like some of those database companies. And we just felt like that would be too complicated for us, and we really just wanted to make the open core free forever, no complications in that regard, and that's sort of the engine that drives this whole thing. And then we have a SaaS layer on top, which is meant for organizations that have lots of different users, and some more complexity to manage, like a lot of environments, so that they can clean them out automatically, things of that sort. Things that start to become important once you're at a certain scale. And then, of course, we support our commercial users as well. So, which is actually a big part of what we're selling, is just having access to the team, and being able to prioritize with our customers and things like that. And we find it works fairly well. I sort of, I don't know, in just kind of sort of business, political, there's pros and cons to this open source thing. And you might argue that it is very strongly to the benefit of the big players in the space, the people selling CPU and RAM, because they love to have like a big thriving open source ecosystem that they don't have to build themselves, because they're pushing hardware basically. And it's, I and I don't think there's another way we would have done it. Like, thinking back, I'm happy with the choices made, but it's I'm still learning about the ins and outs of open source. And heck, like, yeah, even HashiCorp is still learning. Everybody's still learning. Like, Red Hat are making changes to their license model, and like, it's, I'm not in it open source necessarily from a pure ideal. I think it's a practical choice, but also it's a practical choice for us as well as our customers. So it's interesting. I think about this all the time. Like, we've been having a lot of discussions about this on the back of the HashiCorp license changes, and I think it's a conversation that we'll keep having over many years.
Anything in particular that you would do differently if you were building it from scratch tomorrow?
There's a lot of things I would have skipped and reordered our efforts. I think in our case, like, we tried to start to build a commercial product maybe a touch too early, like, given the size of our team. I don't know, like, it's, hindsight 2020 and all. Like, I think, like, we went down a few rabbit holes that we shouldn't have. We probably had too broad a focus for too long, but that's that's typical for a lot of startups. But some of those things you just kind of have to try and see if people are interested. You never know what really resonates with people. Sometimes you could have to kind of throw some spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. So I'm not one for regrets, but I certainly, like, if I could design the process from start to finish to, like, do it differently, there'd be a bunch of things I just wouldn't have done, because they were distractions, or like pretending we're a bigger company than we are. It's a common temptation when you're trying to grow quickly.
Any interesting anecdotes to share on that front?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, I'm thinking of some, but they involve people, and I I don't want to be sensitive to that. I think, like, we certainly, like, hired wrong sometimes, but it's not a slight on the people that we hired. It's just like, we had the wrong skill set in mind. I've really enjoyed working with everybody that has ever been at Garden. But sort of misunderstanding where we are in the process, and then sometimes it's tempting to hire people that are sort of young and hungry but don't exactly know how to do this stuff. Now we're hiring more veterans as of late, because we need their experience. But as I said, no real regrets. It's just a lot of things you learn. but yeah, I can't really go into the anecdotes. I don't feel it's appropriate.
That's fine. Let me ask you one more. And this is one that I ask a lot of people, and I've gotten some of my favorite responses to. But if you were allowed to only pick one thing, and you wanted to pick the single item that provided you with the highest return on investment that you've ever done for your career, and it could be anything, it could be a method of doing something, or a book, or a course, or a habit.
Mhm.
What would it be if you could only choose one?
Only choose one. I have a few in mind. So okay, I'll go a touch personal. I think learning about, like, whichever way you may be, like neurodivergent, or for me, like understanding what um, first discovering that I have a bit of ADHD was very helpful. It explained a lot of things, and like understanding the implications of your sort of tendencies. And for me, like, it could be, there's a little bit of anxiety, there's ADHD. I'm good at, I'm not the most structured person. Just really coming to terms with your strengths and weaknesses. I could kind of summarize it that way. And that makes it so much easier to communicate with a team, not to be too hard on yourself, like when things are not going great, and to figure, like, to really, it really helps, like, in how you compose a team around you, because you have to kind of match strengths and weaknesses with different people. I think probably fundamentally that has the sort of most wide-ranging impact for me. Um, and it's maybe a touch more specific than just, for me, like starting a company. It probably has like literally advanced my career the most, because you learn so fast. It's a good thing. Like, it works for me, but it would have been really hard to actually do that successfully without sort of having a good self-awareness. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. I think it will resonate with a lot of people. Jon, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. I appreciate your time. For everybody who wants to follow your little adventure, I mentioned already garden.io, a lot of flowers, a really nice report to look at. How do they follow you personally? Twitter? Oh, I'm sorry. X.
Yeah, I have an account. You're not going to find that much activity. I'm a, what you might term, a social introvert, and I don't don't use social media that much. But there's the Garden.io Twitter account, and you'll find, like, whenever that's active, either I'm behind it, or commenting on it. I love to see people on our Discord as well. You can come in there and ask questions and have a conversation about things, and I spend a bit of time there. So, and then, yeah, the occasional blog post on the Garden.io blog. But yeah, that's about as much social media I can offer you.
Okay. And for everybody who wants to get started with garden, where do they go? What do they do?
Well, you can get like a high level view of what Garden does just on our website. But we know, the way I learn about tools, you go to the documentation, and or look at the videos, like blog posts. I would personally probably start with the documentation to kind of get my bearings. And then, yeah, if it seems interesting, hop on over to the Discord and ask your questions. We're happy to talk to you.
Awesome. Jon Edvald, everybody, the CEO and co-founder at Garden.io. Thank you.
Thank you so much.